Good morning, everyone. It's great to be standing here first thing in the morning amongst everyone who's committed to building an EV ecosystem in the country. So quite a good way to start the day for me. I'm sure that's the same for you also. So thanks for being here. Alvarez and Marsal is a knowledge partner for this event, and we'll walk you through some of the contents that we have discussed in detail in the white paper. We encourage you to go through the white paper. And before we start, maybe I'll spend a minute introducing Alvarez and Marsal. I'm sure many of you know Alvarez and Marsal, but maybe a minute of time I'll spend on telling you who we are, what we do, and how we do it. So we are one of the leading management consulting firms amongst the most premium consulting firms in the world, based out of US, present in about more than 25 countries, most major cities in the world. That's what we do. Some of the key services we offer, more relevant to EV ecosystem, are around commercial due diligences, financial due diligences, business transformation, strategy, disputes investigations, and a bunch of other things. We also have a business around business turnarounds, which we are the global leaders in. And just to quote a few of the marquee transactions, we were the ones leading the wind down of Lehman Brothers in US. Closer home, we had SR Steel and many, many more. So that's the firm we are. We focus really on leadership, leading to actions and result. Purely result-oriented firm. That's how we differentiate, and that's how we are as a firm. And these are some of the core values that we follow while we do the work that we do. With that, I'll get started with the core content. So the topic we have for today's discussion is around the challenges that EV industry is facing in the world, in India more specifically. EV has moved from being, if there is going to be electric vehicles, to more around when and how much and which segment is going to come in first versus which segment comes in later. So I don't think any of us really believe the debate is more around if EVs is the future. EV is the future of mobility, and maybe I can also say future of mobility is electric vehicles, either ways. So EVs are here, and why do we really need to look at EVs? I think some global context all of us have seen. It starts with the whole green revolution. We have seen carbon dioxide emissions going up in the world, cause of concern for everyone in India and globally. India is one of the significant contributors to that. Around 7% of global emissions are coming from India at a global level. 7% is a meaningfully large number, right? India is the third largest contributor to global carbon dioxide emissions. What happens within India? Transport is one big contributor. 13% of India's emissions come from transportation. So it's really the need of the hour that we look at transportation as a sector as one of the key routes through which we achieve a greener future, cleaner cities, and hence this whole electric vehicle agenda, not just a pure TCO debate. TCO is very important, no doubts about it, but it is also important from an environmental perspective. And hence this is a very relevant conversation. A quick status check on what is happening around the world. I mean, how is India doing? I mean, we look at some of the other countries who are spearheading the EV adoption. Countries like Norway, they have 25% of the current vehicles today on the road being electric vehicles. Now, mind it, this is a data on stock. This is not a data on the new vehicle sales. That number is even more attractive, right? China is far ahead. US is ahead. Countries like Germany are again doing their bit in EV adoption. India is still far behind, but India is clearly on that path. I spoke about if EVs are going to be the future or not going to be the future. I mean, countries are now talking about specific timelines by which they will phase out internal combustion engines. So EV has to be the way forward. The question is about when they will be ready. I mean, each country has their own challenges. Like Norway has put 2025 as an officially announced timelines. There are about a dozen other countries that are the names you can see on the slide, which have clearly announced timelines by which they will phase out the traditional internal combustion engine vehicles, and it's all going to be EV. India again has ambitious plans. By 2030, we want to, and we have a clear view by vehicle category. For example, the stated ambition on 2 and 3-wheeler side is about 70-80% of the total new vehicle sales, which is quite a healthy ambition. A lot needs to be done. Now the question comes is, if this is needed, we are committed, what's the problem? Well, every journey has some issues. It's not that just having an ambition is good enough. We need to look at issues and we need to keep solving for those issues. So the way we looked at it is we connected with different stakeholders from the whole industry. We spoke with people who are looking from financing perspective, people who are OEMs, people who are suppliers, people who are the end users, buyers, dealers, and we try to understand what are the challenges the industry is facing today, which are coming in the way of a higher adoption. Okay, and we look at some of these challenges. You will be familiar with most of these. This is slightly more crystallized list. The list is a little longer. One of the typical ones is a TCO, total cost of ownership, which is something this whole industry is talking about. That's a new way of thinking, and we are not talking about the upfront cost, but the long-term value. And long-term value doesn't just include your fuel cost daily. It also includes your maintenance cost. It also includes your battery replacement cost, and it goes all the way till the end when you're thinking of a resale value of the vehicle. That is something a buyer is going to think of as they plan their purchase and they look at ICE versus EV as a trade-off and think of it, right? Similarly, customer awareness, product range, servicing issues, charging infrastructure. These are some of the burning issues that we have, and we came up with this list. Now, one may argue that there could be a few other things that should have been in the list. One example could be, let's say, recycling. Question is recycling of batteries not important? It is important. It is very important. But our perspective is to talk about challenges from an adoption perspective. While recycling is a big challenge, but from an adoption perspective, probably some of the other challenges are more critical today. That's the reason you will see some of the other issues not getting into this list. Now, what we did looking at this is we put together a framework to do a detailed evaluation and try to see how does it look like by vehicle category. So after this analysis, we came up with by issue, how does it look like for different vehicle categories, and a red, yellow, green would tell you which issue appears to be stronger as a higher degree of concern, a higher degree of challenge for each of these different vehicle categories. Now, I'm not sure if this is very visible till the end. In case it looks a little busy, you can refer to the knowledge report that you would have got in your welcome kit. So this gets covered in detail there, so you can refer to it there. Essentially, what we looked at is we shortlisted half a dozen issues, which we took for a further deep dive to see what is happening in those issues, what could be the real bottlenecks around the concerns in those, and what could be the path forward to resolve some of these issues. The ones you see on the left-hand side, the ones in yellow, charging infrastructure, favorable TCO. So these 6 issues are what we have shortlisted and covered in detail in our knowledge report. I'll walk you through the first one, which is limited charging infrastructure. Basic question, why is this even important? I mean, in very simple terms, this is like a fuel pump for a vehicle. You can have the best of the vehicle, best of the engineering, customer is willing, but if the fuel pumps are not able to support that vehicle, the proposition doesn't come out that strong. So this is something which is really important. A buyer would hesitate to buy the best of the products if they are not very sure they can use it the way they want to use it. Hence, this issue becomes one of the most important ones. It's a bit of a chicken and egg. What comes first? You get the vehicles first, you get the charging first. But charging undeniably is one of the issues that people look at when they think of buying a vehicle. Question is, where do we stand today? Looking at some statistics, the metric we look at is how many vehicles are there for every charger. So vehicles per charger is a ratio you look at to compare how are you doing, because there is no clear global benchmark which has been established as yet in terms of what is the right density, right? At least in petrol, diesel cars, we have figured out that a certain number of fuel pumps, stations and all do work well, but this is still evolving. So when you look at countries like China, US, we will see that there are about 1 charger for every 20 vehicles in US. The number is even more attractive when you look at China. India, that number is estimated to be about 135. The number itself tells you that, I mean, looking at what some of our global peers, some of the countries will look up to, what they are doing versus where we stand right now in terms of our charger density. And hence, I mean, it intuitively tells you that a lot more needs to be done. Okay. Intuitive question would be, I mean, it's a business proposition. If there is a big demand-supply gap, why is there a gap? I mean, someone will come and fill that gap, right, if it's such a clear opportunity. Well, not so easily. Problem is economics. The charging network in India, broadly at an overall network, has an estimated utilization about 6 to 7%. Utilization translates into your revenues, which translates into your profits. So if you don't have a bare minimum utilization, you can't really make money out of the business. And if you can't make decent money out of the business, it's gonna either go slow in terms of adoption, or it's not gonna be as attractive a proposition from someone who's thinking of setting up a charging infrastructure. Looking at global benchmarks, again, this problem is there also. They are at least about 10-11%, again at an average level. This is not a peak utilization, this is an average utilization. We estimate this number needs to be closer to 22-23% for the business to start making sense. There could also be an element of value-added services you can put on top, but then it also requires some more capex, some more investments, higher land parcel for you to be able to offer those services. So till we reach that point, this business is still going to be more like an optimistic bet, and that is how different stakeholders are going to look at it. But that is really the factor which is one of the factors which is leading to a lower density of chargers per vehicle that we have in India. Question is, what's the right number? I mean, that's a very debated thing. And we did some analysis around this. Now, there are 2 or 3 ways you can look at what's the right number. Today, in India, we have about 135 vehicles per charger. If we go closer to the global benchmarks, which is around, let's say, 20, we will need 46,000 more chargers. That's a whopping number. If you look at maybe a base case scenario, let's say I am at 100, I need to go to 20, let me target 135 to 20, let me target 100, the number is close to 3,000. Somewhere in between, the number is close to 6,500. An important question is, what's the right number for India? It's not easy to give you a direct maths, right? Because if you look at a US versus you look at India, there are things which are different. It's not simply you can say, this is what US is doing, this is exactly what I will do. India, again, has its own challenges. Vehicle density is different, population density is different, the mix of vehicles is very different, the way you look at public charging versus home charging is different, driving distances are also a little different. Now, we have done a lot of analysis around all of these parameters, okay? And not getting into the technicals of analysis, but if you do a similar analysis for a country like India, and if you have to look at what is the right number, equivalent to that 19 or 20 in India, which gives you a similar level of service to the electric vehicles, that number is closer to 70. Somewhere between 68 to 70 is that number. So the middle scenario, which is something we have called a realistic scenario, which is sitting at about 75, that is a kind of scenario we should aim for to get a very similar level of service for different vehicles, given the mix is also different in India. Advantage for India is that our population density is quite good, which will make it attractive for chargers to have a higher utilization, and hence businesses would become viable sooner than probably many of the other countries would see. So that is one real advantage a country like India with densities will always offer, which essentially means we need about 6,000 more chargers for the current vehicle density we have. So we are not like 10% of what we need. We are clearly at about 50% approximately of where we need to be. Important question for us now would be, electric vehicles have reached a stage where the growth from this point onward could be exponential. The question is, can the charging infrastructure also support by ramping up in an exponential way? Otherwise, these numbers would look very different if we again stand here next year and again do the same analysis. Question is, what needs to be done? Who needs to do it? I mean, if the problem is big, problem is clearly big. Who needs to work on it? Well, it's not a one-person solution, in our opinion. We believe different set of stakeholders need to come together. And government being one, because government can nudge some of these economics in the right direction. They have the tools around incentivization as well as disincentivization. And they also have the tools of policy framework through which they can incentivize some specific types of action. Charging service providers, clearly the whole innovation around how the product is packaged, what services they offer, whom they tie up with, what value-added services you generate in a country like India, clearly is something that they can do the best. Utilities have a very important role to play. I mean, we tend to ignore utilities. Problem is, I mean, distribution is through utilities. India is not a power deficit country today, but the problem is power distribution infrastructure is not one piece. There are 3 legs to it. We have generation, we have transmission, we have distribution. If we are not power deficit, broadly we mean that power generation is sorted. Transmission is also not bad. Distribution has issues. Distribution is slightly patchy, at least relative to generation and transmission. we don't have enough redundancies in the network. The network is not able to take the load which an EV adoption would bring. So utilities clearly have a role to play if infrastructure has to be supported at the back end with equivalent amount of power getting delivered to those charging stations. Similarly, oil marketing companies, they are sitting on the best real estate at the right places, which is relevant for a charging infrastructure. That's the way they are build their business. Fleet operators, interestingly, are playing an important role. Now, they are not a direct contributor, but they are someone who is driving adoption of some specific use cases around commercial applications. And they are building their own network or doing a private network or a partnership network around the routes they are running. So while we are waiting for a broader network to come up, but at least they are able to get it going and get that option started and get the whole thing refined in terms of the business models, products, technologies. So that's what they're doing. Residential and commercial owners, the societies need to play a role because majority of the charging in future will end up being slow charging. That is where these home and office is probably one of the core locations where people will look at charging their vehicles, given they're going to park them for 5, 6, 7 hours at least, and that's the best time to slow charge. EV OEMs, globally we have seen multiple OEMs have taken the lead. In India, we have Ather started it at some stage with offering their own grid. Globally, Tesla has been doing that. So they have also been a good catalyst in giving that initial adoption. And banks, NBFCs, private capital, needless to say, no business really grows without the right amount of capital coming both to the business and to the buyer in this case, given the upfront cost is quite steep still. So ultimately, our view is that all of these people need to come together, do their bits in solving this problem, either directly in charging or around charging. But that is how we collectively solve the problem that we have around charging infrastructure and as it scales up. Government clearly has a role to play in this because wherever there's a viability gap, wherever there are issues around policy, where different things need to come together, for example, utilities, that is where government can play the role because individual companies will have slightly limited influence in terms of how you can bring these stakeholders together, power discoms together to enable this whole backbone. We also have some innovations that we have seen in the industry around how you go and bypass some of the challenges you face. A couple of the known ones are removable batteries. Many manufacturers have launched vehicles with removable batteries. Of course, not applicable to a bigger category vehicle, but maybe more to a two-wheeler, some bit of three-wheelers, focusing on that and taking care of limited public charging infrastructure. Battery swapping, again, something being talked about. Two categories of players. One is who are coming up with specifically designed products, like a Gogoro, like a Bounce, people are talking about it, or people who are building an infrastructure around your existing batteries and offering you a battery swapping solution. And of course, battery innovations, improvement in battery technologies, range, charging time, a variety of companies working again on this field, both in India and globally. So that is where we see a lot of action happening, and these are going to be working in parallel to the core charging infrastructure setup to help us come out of this, this perceived issue of unavailability of charging infrastructure. So these are some of the thoughts we have on charging. Our report also discusses 5 other issues. Like I said, about half a dozen issues we have covered. And the first one is clearly lack of TCO. Now this is not true for all categories because there are many categories where TCO, the total cost of ownership, is quite positive now. But there are still some categories where TCO happens to be a problem. For example, if you look at personal cars, the subsidy scenario is not very strong if the car is taken for personal use. There are some state subsidies, maybe not national subsidies, and you don't really run them for those many kilometers today, which really leads to a mass level break even for a majority of the vehicles. So some of those TCO concerns are still there with the category of vehicle, but thanks to recent fuel hikes, thanks to advancement in technology, a lot of these are becoming better than probably what we saw them as like a year or 2 year back. Issue number 3, issues with supply chain. We all know what is happening with supply chain today. There is a long waiting, parts are not available. Everyone is talking about chip shortage. Right? That's an issue that we are facing today. Essentially, we are dependent on future and even dependent on imports, and even the global supply chains are constrained right now. So 2 clear categories, or maybe 3 clear categories where we have import dependencies: battery cells, we have semiconductor chips, we also have magnets for motors where there's a dependence. Now, we believe some of this dependence will continue because India is not right now just ready that in the next 1 year we can solve these issues. So it's going to be solved through two ways. One is better global partnerships, tie-ups, and second is global manufacturing capacities. As they scale up, some of these issues will start becoming better, and gradually India will have to think about how they solve some of these issues in the long term, not just for the next 1-2 years, but if this is an industry, India wants to be an export hub again when it comes to an EV age, then that's something to look forward to. Issue number 4, in this we have spoken about lack of product range or breadth. Now, we have done some analysis, again you can refer a report for that. Technically what we are trying to say here is that not in all product categories you have an adequate number of products available. Like if I as a buyer am going to go and make a purchase decision, do I have an equivalent EV option available today? Answer is not a very strong yes in all categories. For example, two-wheelers, we have good product options in scooters, but when it comes to motorcycles, the options are limited. You talk about a very big segment in commercial vehicles, which is light commercial vehicles, segment which is more known by Tata Ace actually. We don't have a lot of product options in those categories. So there are segments which are high volume drivers, serve very important use cases, but products are still yet to come in. And as those products come in, some of these availability constraints are going to go away and people are going to embrace the EVs in a more effective way. Second last, quality and safety concerns. We have touched upon the product quality because nascent stage of industries, not all manufacturers had given very good quality products to start with. Where we stand today, what is it about the safety concerns people are talking about, battery fires and all, we have touched upon that. And last but not the least, investment and financing. Financing again saw issues because both at a company level, at a consumer level, there were issues. Banks were not able to understand the products. Some of the loan products that they have are not super relevant to the way an EV loan product would need to be. So there's still some way to go for banks and fintech to get this proposition right. People are working on it, but it's still not perfected. So that kind of becomes a bit of a barrier when you look at more of commercial use cases and also your personal use cases on the EV side. So this is what we have covered in the report. I would encourage you to go through that report, look at it. Do let us know what you think about some of these issues. I'll leave you with the last point, which is our view on future. So we have looked at what factors are driving, where different segments of the industry are, and where do we see future adoption. So looking at by the end of the decade, we see some categories clearly picking up. One of the clear categories is scooters, one of the flag bearers of EV adoption today. Motorcycles is slightly behind and it's going to start picking up, but because it has a delayed start, maybe it will trail by a few years. Three-wheelers, again, we are not talking e-rickshaws right now because that is either way 100% electric by definition. E-autos, we believe this is going to see more and more penetration. Use case is quite strong here. So, and commercial vehicles do run a decent number of kilometers. So this is again going to see a very healthy penetration. Between cars, passenger vehicles versus commercial, we see commercial is going to come out more stronger. Two reasons. One is subsidies favorable to them. Second is the number of kilometers they run per day is more favorable, and then you kind of make a better TCO on that. Last but not the least, light commercial vehicles. We personally are quite excited about the opportunity that LCVs present. The only challenge being that we haven't started that journey. Products haven't started coming out in a way. So it's going to take a little time before products come out. I mean, Tata has announced Ace EV a few days back. Different startups are working on it, but still we don't have products on road which have started their pilots, testing, and that adoption has started. For that reason, we believe this segment is going to take a few more years to reach where others have reached. But this is a segment we continue to be feeling very positive about. So I leave you with these thoughts. This is what we think is going to be the future scenario. This is how we think is going to be the adoption scenario. And do let us know what you think about the report. I hope you find this informative and value adding. And thank you so much. Have a nice day.